Hey, folks, it is November the 2nd, and we are discussing chapter 69. That's the last chapter we have on the Crusades. So this talks about the effects or what happened because of the Crusades, but also why it didn't work out. So we have our terms up on the board. We have why did the Crusades fail, its effects on feudalism, commerce, learning, and defense. Tomorrow, we're probably going to talk about elections. So even though this isn't a U.S. history course, it's the only social studies or history course you have this year. So we're going to spend some time talking about it because it's a historical event. You live in history. Things happen. So there's that. But when we do come back after that, we'll talk about Mongolians, Genghis Khan, or it was pronounced Genghis Khan, Kublai Khan, and then the rise of the Ottoman Turks. So that's the week. So I don't have any images for today because it's talking about topics. It's not talking about events or people, like really. I mean, they mentioned Francis of Assisi, but we already talked about him. And we already mentioned how he went to the Sultan and tried to convert him to Christianity. But he did so peacefully. He came back home okay. And so it goes to show that despite the warfare, people weren't like necessarily always inhuman to one another. The book's correct to point out that it took 200 years. In that 200 years process, there were a lot of people reaching across to the other side and having discussions. They were trading, sometimes intermarrying, things like that. So it wasn't just like constant wholesale slaughter, no violence was a pretty big topic for it. All right, so they gave us three main reasons why the Crusades failed. So what was the first reason?
It's like they didn't have like sea power.
Yeah, they had to send their armies across the ocean, but they didn't have any sea power. Like, there were no strong navies at this time. We're going to see that Europeans are going to develop strong navies, but it's going to be because of the Crusades. The Crusaders are going to learn a lot from the Arabs, who were the sea power of the day, on how to do things like use new kinds of tools for navigation, such as astrolabes. How to use sails effectively to catch wind from more than just one angle, instead of just using one big square sail like the Vikings did. So the Crusaders had no navy. Even if they did have a navy, it'd be tough because that's a huge expense and it takes time. It's one of the reasons why they say America has had no invasion like during the World Wars. We have two big oceans on both sides of us, and we have friendly neighbors to the north and south who don't want to start a war with us or join a war against us. So we're pretty blessed in that. So what's another reason on why the Crusades failed? Yeah, disorganized, right? Yeah, so not in the least bit, but often they were fighting one another in a wholesale battle. This is why countries tend to have one leader in charge of military forces, one top leader who tells his underlings what to do. That's a recipe for success with all the way back to the ancient Greeks. That's why the Spartans would have a king for warfare and a king for the home front. I mean, the Athenians did the same things when they would have an archon for war. Same with America. We have the executive branch, of civilian leadership of the military, and then they tell the generals what to do. All right, so one more. What was the third reason why the Crusades didn't make it? Not enough people. Yeah. So, not enough people to occupy. And see, the Romans were very smart about this when they expanded their empire. whenever they would expand their empire, they would do two things. The first was the people who were there, they would let them live as they wanted to, as long as they paid their taxes and helped out Rome in war. The second thing they would do is whenever their soldiers retired, they gave them land in that new territory, and so that the Roman they could be integrated into Rome. The Crusaders didn't do this. They treated it as a pilgrimage. You go down there, you fight for a couple years, and you get back home because you want to go back to your family. You don't want to go live in that part of the world. And Europeans don't necessarily look like they're kind of made for living in deserts and stuff. I mean, especially like my ancestors, you know. Trust me, I've already had skin cancer. So not all of us extremely pale people who are almost transparent are made to be out in the sun all day. So, you know, it's just a fact of life. So, yeah, so there's not enough of them there to hold ground. They had fortresses. They had soldiers who did stay. They had some feudal lords. But a lot of times these were like the guys who didn't have anything to go back home to. So what effects will this have on feudalism? How did it undermine it?
Like whenever the nobles would die, everything they owned would go to the king, and they couldn't have enough money to own stuff.
And this is actually going to make Europe stronger. It's going to unify it unintentionally. Oops. So yeah. Many estates went to the kings because Crusaders either died without heirs, and if there's no heir, it goes back to the king. It was technically the king's in the first place. Or they couldn't pay their taxes. Uh-oh. So yeah, they couldn't pay their mortgage, so the bank reclaimed it. In this case, the bank's the king. And so this is where we're going to see, especially after the bubonic plague, it's going to be the rise of super powerful kings. Like when people think of the Middle Ages, they often think of a super powerful king. Now, really, that's after the Middle Ages, really. And it's going to be an after effect of it. And so we're going to have kings that are going to be strong enough to field giant armies with very, very expensive weapons and professionally trained, like never seen before. Whereas before this, you basically had just a bunch of little small armies led by the knights. Okay, so good. Now, what did it mention about the effects of commerce?
They traded with a bunch of people.
Yeah, they traded with a bunch of them. And here's one cool thing about the Islamic territory. They spread Islam all the way through, say, like through the Indian Ocean into like the Philippines, through Africa. They're going to go all the way into Western China. And that's going to, because of that, they're going to have common language, Arabic, which goes along with being Muslim. And they're going to have common cultures and traditions. And so you're going to have traders who are going to be able to start all the way in West Africa and trade with people all the way in China. So they have access to goods that Europeans couldn't dream of. European clothing was made almost entirely of wool, which would get stinky and nasty and mildewy when it rained. European food, the only spices they really had were very, very bland spices and salt. They didn't have access to sugar. They didn't have access to spices. And so food, now when they got spices from the Middle East because of the Crusades, they found that the food didn't always have to taste putrid when they ate it. They found that it could actually taste good, like eating could be a pleasurable thing. And so there's going to be a huge demand for spices and sugar and stuff like that. But because it always came through the middlemen, the traders in the Middle East, it was always jacked up in prices. So this is going to lead to a demand for people to trade directly with China and India and Malaysia in order to get these like really nice things like silk, spices and sugar. So they got to experience silks, art, and most importantly, spices. Of course, there'll also be like precious gems and things like that. But spices, the ability to make food taste good, that's going to be a real big thing. That is going to have people really want to. That's what's going to fuel exploration more so than even gold and silver, because like only kings and queens, like super rich people, could afford these things, and even then they couldn't use it all that often. But the Crusades, all of a sudden, had common soldiers get to experience these things, and they really wanted it at home. And the few lucky ones who got to bring some of it home, like cinnamon or something like that, and they'd let their family taste it. They thought it was like a miracle. They thought it had medicinal purposes and everything. So that it was like a really big deal. And when we talk about the age of exploration, it's the Crusades that's really going to start the age of exploration. All right. So what about learning? It kind of briefed on this, but hey, Jonathan, what else as far as like intelligence and stuff did they get to experience in the Crusades?
They learned the geography of the land.
So they learned a bit about the land. That's true. But what about like stuff?
Agriculture and stuff like that.
Well, that's true. That's true. I don't know if the book mentioned that, but they did. They learned a lot about irrigation, rotating crops. Here's what they learned about agriculture. They're going to see that the Arabs were still able to use architecture. They're going to learn about that, how to build their castles and their places at home better. You're like, wow, look at this. They're still building their buildings like the high point of the ancient Romans. We forgot how to do that. They're also going to learn, they're going to get access to some of old philosophical works, which is going to help lead into the sciences and things like that. And also mathematics. They're going to get exposed to things like algebra and even more geometry that they've forgotten in the past. So this is going to like lead to a lot of exposure. And whenever Constantinople falls and you have a flood of refugees coming from that fallen city, they're going to bring a lot of works that we still have today from that fall. Now, the last one we have is defense. Now, the Crusades are going to do a lot to try to bolster up certain parts of Eastern Europe. And who is this supposed to like protect Europe from? The invasion of the Turks, the Ottomans. So we're just going to say, well, and the Turks are going to get very good at what they do, and they're actually going to make it all the way almost to Germany. So it will bolster Europe, especially with the rise of powerful monarchs against the Ottomans. And the Ottomans are going to be different from the Arabs we've learned about in the past. Howdy.
Hi, how are you? No, great, nothing, good.
Okay. All right. So let's go bolster Europe against the Ottomans. So here we see, there's a lot of things, but you can think about this with a lot of things. There's a lot of things that might have happened in your life as well, not just big things like this, where it might have seemed like a failure, but you learn lessons from it. Well, Europe unintentionally had this. This is going to help lead to the building of nation states. Once you finally have feudalism, and the biggest thing that's going to kill feudalism is this and the expensive militaries, and also the fact that people are going to start moving to a market economy where people are actually trading goods instead of just trying to force serfs to feed them. And that's going to lead to a lot of innovation and human happiness and stuff like that. So, good stuff. You have any questions? All right, contain your enthusiasm. Here. So yeah, tomorrow we're going to talk about how elections work, things like that. And talk a little bit about the differences between the parties. If you're not sure about that, I can answer whatever questions. Just remember, my job's not to tell you how I vote. My job's to tell you about the system so you can make your own decision. Really, it's my job. All right. Because I don't want my teachers' kids telling them like how they should vote when they grow up. That would make me mad. All right. So, hey, kids, I'll talk to you later. We're not going to do a chapter tomorrow and all that good stuff. Pretty short today, just 15 minutes, 30 seconds. And I'll talk to you later.